I went back to the villa after his death, and the cameras revealed what truly transpired inside. The police had called it a tragic accident. My friends called it a cruel twist of fate. His family called it an unbearable loss. For 3 weeks, I called it the end of my world. But the truth? The truth was colder, sharper, and far more terrifying than any simple tragedy. The truth was waiting for me, stored on a cloud server, recorded in high definition through the 6 discrete lenses my husband, Mark, had insisted we install for my protection. He told me they were to keep me safe. He was wrong. They were there to record my destruction, but in the end, they recorded his. Before I take you inside that beautiful, sun-drenched prison and show you the secrets hidden in the digital shadows, I need you to do something for me. If you've ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong, even when the whole world was telling you it was right, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you're new here, because this community is for survivors, and turn on those notifications so you don't miss what's next. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. What city, what state, what country. Knowing you're out there listening helps more than you can imagine. Trust me, you are going to want to stay until the very end of this story. Because what those cameras showed me wasn't just about his death. It was about his entire life and the lie I had been living. To understand the depth of the fall, you have to see the view from the top. And my God, our view was spectacular. Our life was a meticulously curated masterpiece, a portrait of success and happiness that hung in the gallery of our social circle for everyone to admire and envy. We lived in a sprawling villa nestled in the rolling hills of Tuscany, a place Mark had bought for us after the sale of his second tech company. He called it our forever home. It was all honey-colored stone, ancient terracotta tiles, and massive arched windows that framed the cypress trees and olive groves like living paintings. From our terrace, you could see the distant glimmer of Florence on a clear day. Neighbors, a mix of wealthy expats and old Italian families, would wave as they drove past our wrought iron gates. They saw the perfect family, the handsome, brilliant husband, and the adoring, elegant wife. Our children, Leo, who was 8, and Mia, who was 6, were the vibrant heart of that perfect picture. Their laughter echoed through the marble hallways. Their little footprints were always being wiped from the polished floors by our housekeeper, Sophia. I'd spend my mornings taking them to their international school in a nearby town, my afternoons filled with yoga classes, trips to the local market for fresh pasta and sun-ripened tomatoes, and overseeing the household. It was a life of beautiful, predictable rhythms. Mark was the provider, the architect of our gilded cage, and I was its devoted keeper. What no one seemed to remember, or perhaps what I allowed them to forget, was that I'd had a life before this, a career. I was an investigative journalist, and a good one. I was tenacious, hungry for the truth, and had a knack for seeing the patterns others missed. I met Mark while on assignment, profiling up-and-coming tech entrepreneurs. He was dazzling. Whip-smart, impossibly charming, with a smile that could disarm world leaders. He pursued me with a single-minded intensity that felt like the most romantic thing in the world. He sent 1,000 yellow tulips to my tiny apartment, my favorite flower. He flew to London for a single dinner when I was there for a story. He didn't just court me, he laid siege to my heart until surrender was the only option. His proposal was as grand as everything else he did. A private gondola in Venice, a diamond that felt obscenely heavy on my finger, and a promise of a life beyond my wildest dreams. "You won't have to chase stories anymore, Sarah," he'd whispered, his voice warm against my ear. "We'll be the story, a love story." And I believed him. I was so in love, so swept away by the sheer force of his affection that I saw it as an elevation, not a sacrifice. So I gave it all up. I traded my byline for his last name, my press pass for a platinum credit card, my cramped, chaotic apartment for a Tuscan villa. I packed away my ambition alongside my notebooks and recorders. I convinced myself that being Mrs. Mark Henderson, mother to his children, was a more important job than any story I could ever write. I poured all of my intelligence, all of my focus, into creating the perfect home, raising perfect children, and being the perfect wife. I managed our social calendar, hosted flawless dinner parties for his investors, and remembered the birthdays of every one of his business associates. My identity became a reflection of his success. I was the silent partner, the woman behind the great man, and for a long time, that was enough. I loved him with a totality that left no room for doubt. He was my world, and my devotion was absolute. The children were my universe. Our home was my sanctuary. That was the illusion, a beautiful, fragile, and utterly convincing lie, and that is what was at stake when it all came crashing down. The life I had built, the identity I had assumed, and the 18 years I had invested in a man I never truly knew at all. Looking back now, the red flags were not just flags. They were giant, crimson banners flapping in a hurricane, and I was the fool standing in the middle of it all, telling myself it was just a breeze. It started subtly, about 2 years before his death. It began with my health, a persistent, creeping fatigue that settled deep in my bones, a kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. Then came the brain fog. I'd walk into a room and forget why I was there. I'd lose my train of thought mid-sentence, grasping for a word that was just out of reach. I, who had once juggled sources and deadlines and complex narratives, was suddenly struggling to remember the grocery list. Mark was the picture of concern. He'd wrap me in his arms, his chin resting on the top of my head. "You're just run down, baby," he'd say, his voice a soothing balm. "You do so much for this family. You're trying to be Superwoman." He suggested I see a doctor, which I did. The doctor ran blood tests. Everything came back normal. "Probably just stress," the physician concluded with a shrug. "Try to relax more." That's when his sister, Clara, became a more constant presence in our lives. Clara was a few years older than Mark, sharp-featured and single, with an air of bohemian wisdom about her. She practiced alternative medicine, something with herbs and energy fields I never fully understood. She had always been a peripheral figure, but now she started visiting from her home in Milan almost every other weekend. She and Mark would have hushed conversations in the study, their heads bent together. When they emerged, they would be wearing identical masks of worried affection. "I'm worried about you, Sarah," Clara would say, her eyes wide with sincerity as she took my hands in her cool, dry ones. "You're looking so pale. Modern medicine doesn't have all the answers. You're depleted. Your energy is all wrong." She started bringing me special teas. They were herbal concoctions, earthy and slightly bitter, that she insisted would help restore my vitality. "Drink this every night before bed," she'd instruct, handing me a steaming mug. "It's an ancient recipe. It will help you sleep deeply and cleanse your system." Mark would stand behind her, nodding in agreement, encouraging me. "Clara knows what she's doing, honey. Just try it." I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. Clara was my sister-in-law. They loved me. So, I drank the tea. Every single night. The fatigue didn't get better. It got worse. I started having dizzy spells. One afternoon, I was driving the kids back from a play date and had to pull over to the side of the road. the world tilting violently around me. I gripped the steering wheel, my heart pounding, until the spinning stopped. I told Mark about it that night, my voice shaking. The look on his face wasn't just concern, it was fear. "That's it," he declared, his jaw set. "No more driving. It's not safe. Not for you, not for the children. I'll hire a driver." I protested, feeling a fresh wave of humiliation. I was a grown woman, and I couldn't even drive my own children. "It's for the best, Sarah," he said firmly, leaving no room for argument. "Until you're feeling better." My world began to shrink. First the car keys, then the finances. I'd made a mistake paying a bill online, accidentally paying it twice. It was a simple error, a result of the fog in my head. But Mark treated it like a catastrophe. He sat me down at the large oak desk in his study, a stack of papers between us. "Sweetheart, I think this is all becoming too much for you right now," he said, his tone gentle, patient, the way one might speak to a confused child. "Why don't you let me handle the accounts for a while? You just focus on getting well." He made it sound like an act of love, of lifting a burden from my shoulders. In reality, he was cutting my last lifeline to independence. I explained it away because I didn't want to see the truth. I told myself he was just protecting me. It was around this time that the cameras appeared. Mark announced it one evening over dinner. "I've ordered a state-of-the-art security system for the villa," he said. "With everything that's been happening, your dizzy spells. I worry when I'm away on business. This way, I can check in and make sure you and the kids are safe." He had an answer for everything. When I expressed unease about being watched, he smiled that disarming smile. "They're not for watching you, baby. They're for watching out for you." He showed me the app on his phone, how discreet the cameras were. Tiny little dots in the corners of the living room, the kitchen, the hallways, the terrace. "Peace of mind," he called it. I called it unsettling, but I was too tired to fight. My friends started to notice. My best friend from college, Jessica, a doctor back in the States, would video call me, and her face would crease with worry. "Sarah, you don't seem like yourself," she said one day. "You sound distant. Are you sure you're okay?" I'd force a bright smile. "Just tired, Jess. You know how it is with 2 kids." I defended him when she questioned Mark's increasing control. "He's just worried about me. He's being a wonderful, supportive husband." I could hear the doubt in her silence on the other end of the line, but I couldn't bear to hear it voiced. To admit that she might be right would be to admit my perfect life was a sham. So I pulled away from her, from anyone who dared to question the narrative. I was so blind, so incredibly, painfully blind. Mark and Clara had created a bubble of concern and care around me, and I never realized it was actually a cage designed to isolate me, weaken me, and slowly, methodically, erase me. Mark's death was as sudden and dramatic as his life. He was on the terrace, the one that overlooked the sprawling valley, taking a business call. It was late, after the children were in bed. I was inside, curled on the sofa, a book lying open but unread in my lap, feeling the familiar wave of exhaustion from my nightly cup of Clara's tea. I heard a shout, a strange, choked-off sound, followed by a sickening thud. I ran outside. The terrace was empty. His phone lay shattered on the stone tiles. I rushed to the railing, my heart hammering against my ribs, and looked down into the darkness of the terraced gardens below. And I saw him, a crumpled shape in the moonlight. The police investigation was swift and conclusive. It was a tragic accident. The railing was deemed secure. He had over €1 million in his personal accounts, no suspicious debts. His autopsy showed a high blood alcohol level. The official story was that the successful, charismatic Mark Henderson, in a moment of drunken carelessness, had leaned too far over the railing of his beautiful Tuscan villa and had fallen to his death. The funeral was a blur of black clothes, somber faces, and whispered condolences. Clara was my shadow, her arm constantly around my shoulders, her voice a steady murmur of comfort in my ear. "I'm here for you, Sarah," she'd say, squeezing my arm. "We'll get through this together. Mark would want us to be strong for the children." I clung to her, this woman who I thought was my sister, my friend, my only remaining link to the man I had loved. She helped me with the arrangements, with the lawyers, with telling the children that their daddy wasn't coming home. She was magnificent in her efficiency and grief, and I was pathetically grateful. Weeks turned into a hollow gray month. I moved through my days like a ghost in my own home. The villa, once a symbol of our happiness, now felt cavernous and cold. Every corner held a memory that was now laced with pain. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to sell the house, take the children, and go somewhere, anywhere else, to start over. I began the Herculean task of packing up 18 years of a life. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a month to the day since he died. I was in his study, sorting through boxes of old files, when I came across a folder labeled Villa Security. Inside were the manuals and login details for the camera system. I had completely forgotten about them. A wave of nostalgia, sharp and painful, washed over me. I remembered Leo's last birthday party. We'd had it on the terrace. He'd been so happy, chasing his friends around the fountain Mark had installed. I wondered if the cameras had captured it. I just wanted to see my son's happy face, to see Mark in the background, smiling, alive. With trembling fingers, I booted up Mark's laptop, navigated to the security website, and entered the password. The interface was simple: a timeline, a calendar, and thumbnails from the 6 different cameras. I found the date of Leo's party and clicked on it. The footage was there. I watched for a few minutes, a bittersweet ache in my chest. There was Mark, flipping burgers on the grill, ruffling Leo's hair. For a moment, it was like he was still here. After a while, my curiosity got the better of me. The system stored the last 3 months of footage on the cloud. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was a journalist's instinct, long dormant, stirring in the depths of my grief. I clicked on a random day, a few weeks before Mark's death. The kitchen camera. The thumbnail showed Mark and Clara standing by the counter, talking. I clicked play. The audio was crystal clear. Mark had spared no expense. "It's working faster than I thought," Clara was saying, her back to the camera as she stirred something in a mug. My mug. "She's so out of it, she barely questions anything anymore." Mark leaned against the counter, a self-satisfied smirk on his face that I knew all too well. "I told you she would trust us. She's always been too trusting. Did you see her face when I told her I had to take over the finances? Not a flicker of suspicion, just that sad, pathetic gratitude." "She's weak," Clara said, turning around. "She always has been. Giving up her career for you? Pathetic." "Her weakness is our strength," Mark replied. "Once the new power of attorney is signed, we can start the final asset transfer. Her signature won't even be necessary after that. And with her documented cognitive decline, no one will question it when she's finally committed." My blood ran cold. The room started spinning, a dizzy spell more violent than any I had ever experienced before. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles turning white. This couldn't be real. It was a mistake, a nightmare. But I couldn't stop. I had to know. My hands shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. I clicked on another day, and another, and another. I spent the next 6 hours glued to that screen, watching my life unravel in horrifying detail. I saw them. I saw them laughing about my dizzy spells. I saw Clara grinding herbs and powders into my tea every single evening. I saw Mark on the phone with his lawyer, discussing how to build a case for my mental incompetence. "We need medical records, journals, testimony from Clara about her unstable behavior," he'd said. They weren't just trying to steal my money. They were trying to steal my children, my sanity, my life. They had been slowly, systematically poisoning me, not just with the herbs in the tea, but with the gaslighting, the lies, the manufactured concern. The man I had loved, the man I was mourning, had been actively plotting my complete and utter destruction. He hadn't been my protector. He had been my executioner. The world didn't just shatter. It dissolved into a screaming, silent void. I stumbled away from the desk and collapsed onto the floor, a guttural sob tearing from my throat. It was a sound I didn't recognize, raw and animalistic. The grief I had felt for Mark curdled into something else, something toxic and terrifying, pure, unadulterated hatred. I retched, vomiting onto the priceless Persian rug, my body convulsing with the poison of the truth. Every act of kindness, every loving touch, every concerned word from him and his sister over the past 2 years replayed in my mind, now tainted, twisted into acts of profound cruelty. They had held my hands while they fed me poison. They had tucked my children into bed while plotting to steal them from me. Clara had held me at the funeral, her crocodile tears dampening my shoulder, while she reveled in her victory. The betrayal was so absolute, so monstrous, it felt like it should have a physical weight, like it should crush the very air from my lungs. I lay there on the floor of my dead husband's study for what felt like hours, weeping until my eyes were swollen shut and my throat was raw. I cried for the woman I had been, the naive, trusting fool who had walked willingly into the slaughterhouse. I cried for the 18 years I had wasted loving a monster. I cried for my children, who were sleeping peacefully down the hall, oblivious to the fact that their father had tried to destroy their mother. I sobbed until I had no tears left. And then, in the hollowed-out silence that followed, something shifted. The grief, the shock, the despair, they began to burn away, leaving behind something hard and cold and sharp. It was rage, an anger so pure and white-hot it scorched away the last of my weakness. The weak, trusting Sarah Henderson died on that study floor. The woman who got up was someone else entirely. The journalist I had buried years ago clawed her way out of the grave. My mind, suddenly free from the fog of the poison and the fog of deceit, became terrifyingly clear. They thought I was weak. They thought I was pathetic. They had underestimated me, and that was going to be the biggest mistake they ever made. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be the storm that leveled them both. I had the evidence, I had the truth, and I would make them pay for every single lie. My first instinct was to run to the Carabinieri, the local Italian police, to throw the laptop on a desk and scream for justice. But as the cold fire of my rage settled into a strategic burn, I knew that would be a mistake. Mark had been, an influential man here. He had donated to local charities. He knew the mayor. He played golf with the chief of police. They were his friends. They would see a grieving, hysterical widow. They would see the reports from the doctors he had paid, the narrative of my instability that he and Clara had so carefully constructed. They would pat my hand, offer their condolences, and bury the evidence under a mountain of bureaucracy. No, I couldn't fight them on their home turf. I needed an army of my own. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was a razor. There was only one person in the world I knew I could trust without a shadow of a doubt. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the contact. Jessica. Dr. Jessica Evans. My best friend from my university days, now a brilliant toxicologist in Boston. We hadn't spoken properly in months, not since I'd started pulling away, too ashamed of the woman I was becoming to face her sharp, intelligent gaze. I prayed she would answer. It was the middle of the night in the U.S., but she picked up on the second ring. Sarah? What's wrong? It's 3 a.m. The sound of her voice, so familiar and sane, broke through the last of my composure. Jess, I whispered, my voice cracking. Something terrible has happened. No, not just Mark's death. Something else. They were trying to kill me, Jess. Mark and Clara. They were poisoning me. I expected disbelief, confusion, questions. I got none of it. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a deadly calm. I knew it, she said, her voice low and furious. I knew something was wrong. Tell me everything. Do not leave out a single detail. And so I did. For over an hour, the words poured out of me. The fatigue, the tea, the dizzy spells, the cameras, the footage. I told her everything I had seen, everything I had heard. I didn't cry. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. The voice of a journalist reporting the most horrific story of her life. Jessica listened without interruption. When I was finished, there was a moment of silence. Okay, she said, her voice now crisp and professional, the voice of a doctor in charge of a critical situation. Listen to me very carefully, Sarah. You are in danger. Clara is still a threat. You cannot let her know that you know anything. You need to act completely normal. Do you understand? Yes, I breathed. First thing tomorrow, she continued. You need to get samples. You need a hair sample. Pull it from the root, as much as you can get. And you need to figure out a way to get a blood test done. But you cannot go to a local doctor. They could be connected to Mark. We need a private, independent lab. I'll find one for you in Switzerland. It's a few hours' drive. You'll tell Clara you're going on a shopping trip to Lugano. A grief getaway. Something she'll believe. Okay, I repeated, my mind racing. Second, Jessica said, her voice hardening. You need a lawyer, not one of Mark's lawyers. Someone completely unconnected. Someone who specializes in this kind of high-level criminal fraud. A shark. I know someone. Her name is Isabella Rossi. She's Italian by birth, but works out of London. She's the best there is at dismantling powerful men. I'm going to call her as soon as we hang up. She will protect you and the children. A lawyer, I whispered. The word felt solid, real. Yes, and Sarah, the most important thing? The cameras. You need to download every second of that footage, get multiple hard drives, back it up to a new, secure cloud account that only you have the password to. That footage is your life. It's your freedom. It's your justice. Hanging up the phone, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time. I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally. I had a plan. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it was overlaid with a sense of purpose. The weak woman was gone. The strategist was here. I had my mission. The next few weeks were the most terrifying and calculated performance of my life. I had to play the part of the grieving, fragile widow, while secretly waging a war from inside the enemy camp. Clara, bless her black heart, made it easy. She insisted on staying at the villa with me and the children, ostensibly to help me cope. In reality, She was a vulture circling her prize, ensuring the poor, unstable widow didn't do anything rash before the will was read and she could assume full control. Her presence was a constant sickening ordeal. She would bring me her foul tea, her face a mask of sympathy, and I would pretend to sip it before pouring it down the sink the moment she left the room. She'd hug me, her touch like ice, and I would have to fight the urge to recoil. I acted forgetful, dazed, and broken, the very caricature of the woman they had tried to create. My primary mission was the footage. Every night, after Clara and the children were asleep, I would slip into the study, my heart pounding in my ears. The download speeds were agonizingly slow. 3 months of high-definition video from 6 cameras was a monumental amount of data. I sat there for hours each night, the pale glow of the monitor illuminating my face, as I transferred file after file onto a series of encrypted hard drives I'd bought on my shopping trip to Lugano. That trip had been a success. I'd found a private clinic Jessica had recommended and had my blood drawn, sending it off with my hair samples for a full toxicology panel. Now, it was just a waiting game. With each video file that I secured, my case grew stronger. I became an archaeologist of my own betrayal, digging through the digital ruins of my marriage. I found everything. There were clips of Mark on the phone with a shady financial advisor in the Cayman Islands, discussing the shell corporations he was setting up to hide our assets. There was a video call between him and a psychiatrist in Milan, where Mark masterfully painted a picture of my paranoid delusions and emotional instability, laying the groundwork for a future committal. He was so convincing, so charmingly concerned, it made my skin crawl. He was building my prison, brick by brick, and I had been handing him the mortar. The most damning evidence, beyond the poisonings, was a conversation between Mark and Clara, about a week before he died. They were in the living room, celebrating with a bottle of expensive champagne. "The final paperwork for the power of attorney is ready," Mark said, raising his glass. "My lawyer drew it up. All she has to do is sign, and she will. She'll sign anything I put in front of her." "And if she doesn't?" Clara asked, a sly smile on her face. "Oh, she will," Mark said with a chilling laugh. "After a few more weeks of your special brew, she'll barely be able to sign her own name. By the time the will is read, everyone will agree she's in no fit state to manage a fortune, let alone 2 children. I saved that clip under the file name Motive. Isabella Rossi, the lawyer Jessica had found, was a force of nature. We had our first consultation via a secure video call. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and a mane of silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She listened to my story, her expression unreadable. When I finished, I shared my screen and played her the Motive clip. A slow, cold smile spread across her face. "Signora Henderson," she said, her voice a low, precise hum. "They have given us a gift. They have documented their own conspiracy in exquisite detail. We will not just defend you, we will annihilate them." Guided by Isabella, my evidence gathering became more systematic. She had me cross-reference the video files with bank statements, emails, and phone records. A clear, undeniable timeline of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder began to emerge. The toxicology report came back from the Swiss lab. It confirmed everything. Long-term, low-dose exposure to a cocktail of potent alkaloids derived from oleander and foxglove, plants that grew right there in our garden. They were substances that mimicked the symptoms of anxiety and chronic fatigue, but were incredibly difficult to detect in standard tests. It was the perfect, silent weapon. Jessica's report was clinical, devastating, and irrefutable. We had the science, we had the motive, we had the confession. The trap was almost ready to be sprung. The day of the will reading felt like the climax of a play I had been rehearsing for my entire life. We convened in the Florence office of Mark's estate lawyer, a stuffy wood-paneled room that smelled of old paper and male entitlement. I wore a simple black dress, my face pale and my expression deliberately vacant. I was playing my part to the very end. Leo and Mia were with Sophia, our trusted housekeeper, who I had quietly sent on an extended holiday with the children to a resort in Sardinia, far away from the impending fallout. Clara arrived dressed in expensive mourning clothes, a look of pious grief etched onto her face. She sat beside me, placing a cool hand on my arm. "It will be all right, Sarah," she murmured, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Mark made sure you and the children would be taken care of." I just nodded numbly, letting her believe she was still in control. My lawyer, the formidable Isabella Rossi, sat on my other side, a slim leather briefcase resting on her lap. She gave Clara a polite, almost imperceptible nod. The air in the room was thick with tension. Mark's lawyer, a portly man named Signore Bianchi, cleared his throat and began to read the will. It was exactly as I had seen them plan on the video. Mark's words, read aloud, were a final, posthumous act of gaslighting. He spoke of his deep and abiding love for his wife, followed by his grave concerns for my increasingly fragile mental and emotional state. The will stipulated that our entire fortune, including the villa, his stocks, and his life insurance payout of 10 million euros, was to be placed in a trust. And the sole trustee, granted full and absolute control over the funds and legal guardianship of the children until they came of age, was his beloved and trusted sister, Clara. A triumphant, almost invisible smirk flickered across Clara's lips. She squeezed my arm again, a gesture of patronizing pity. "Don't you worry," she whispered. "I'll take care of everything." Signore Bianchi looked up from the document. "And so, with that, the estate passes into the trusteeship of—" "Excuse me." Isabella's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear as shattering glass. Every head turned to her. "Before we proceed, we have some additional materials to submit to the estate regarding the administration of this will, and more specifically, the circumstances surrounding Mr. Henderson's death." Bianchi looked flustered. "This is highly irregular. The will is perfectly clear." "Oh, I agree," Isabella said, her voice dangerously smooth. "Clarity is paramount, which is why I think everyone in this room should see this." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet. With a few taps, she turned it to face the room. The screen lit up with the image of my kitchen. My kitchen. Clara's face went from smug to confused. Then, Isabella pressed play. The audio filled the silent room. Clara's voice, clear as a bell. "It's working faster than I thought. She's so out of it, she barely questions anything anymore." Followed by Mark's arrogant reply. "I told you she would trust us. Her weakness is our strength." Clara's face drained of all color. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Signore Bianchi's jaw went slack. "What is this?" he stammered. "Evidence," Isabella stated calmly, and played the next clip, the champagne celebration. Mark's voice boasting about the power of attorney. Clara's sly smile. I watched Clara's composure crumble, her mask of grief melting away to reveal the raw, panicked greed beneath. "This is fake! It's doctored!" she shrieked, her voice high and shrill. "Is it?" Isabella replied, her eyes cold as steel. "Then perhaps you can explain this. This is from the terrace camera, the night of Mark's death." She pressed play on the final video. The quality was perfect, the infrared camera capturing the scene in crisp black and white. There they were, Mark and Clara, arguing on the terrace. He was gesturing wildly, clearly drunk and gloating. He took a step back, stumbling near the railing. He teetered on the edge, his arms flailing for a moment. The footage showed Clara, not 5 feet away. She could have reached out. She could have grabbed his shirt. She could have tried to help. Instead, she took one deliberate step backward. She watched. She simply stood there as her brother lost his balance and plunged over the edge into the darkness. The camera recorded it all. Her stillness, her waiting. She stood motionless for a full 60 seconds, looking down at where he had fallen, before she finally let out a theatrical, piercing scream and ran for the door. Her inaction was a confession. Just as the scream echoed from the tablet's speakers, the doors to the conference room swung open. 2 uniformed carabinieri officers stepped inside, their faces grim. They were followed by a detective in a plain suit, who I recognized as the man who had briefly interviewed me after Mark's death. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were locked on Clara. "Clara Henderson," the detective said, his voice booming in the suddenly silent room. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and criminal negligence resulting in death." Clara stared at him, then at me. For the first time, she saw me. Not the weak, pathetic woman she thought she knew, but the woman who had brought her down. The hatred in her eyes was pure and venomous. "You!" she screamed, lunging towards me, her hands like claws. "You did this!" The officers were on her in an instant, pulling her back, cuffing her wrists behind her back. She fought them, still screaming threats and curses, her carefully constructed facade shattering into a million pieces. As they dragged her, sobbing and struggling, from the room, she was no longer the elegant, poised woman of Milan. She was just a common criminal, exposed and defeated. Isabella calmly handed a hard drive to the detective. "You'll find everything you need on here, Inspector," she said, "along with the full toxicology report from a certified Swiss laboratory and sworn affidavits detailing the financial crimes." The detective nodded, a new respect in his eyes as he looked at me. "Signora Henderson, it seems we owe you an apology." The aftermath was a legal firestorm. With the video evidence and the toxicology reports, the case against Clara was airtight. The investigation uncovered the offshore accounts, the fraudulent documents, the entire web of deceit she and Mark had woven. She was denied bail. Faced with a life sentence for conspiracy to commit murder, she eventually confessed to everything in a desperate plea bargain, hoping for a lighter sentence. She admitted to the poisoning, the gaslighting, the plan to have me committed and steal my children. Her testimony painted a picture of Mark that was even darker than I had imagined, a narcissistic sociopath who saw people as pawns in his game, and who had decided I was no longer a useful piece on the board. Clara was sentenced to 25 years in prison. With her confession, all of Mark's posthumous plans unraveled. The fraudulent will was thrown out. The power of attorney documents he'd been preparing were rendered worthless. Isabella's legal team worked tirelessly, and within 6 months, they had clawed back every cent Mark had tried to hide in offshore accounts. His reputation, once golden, was utterly destroyed. The news stories painted him not as a tragic victim, but as a monstrous villain. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been delivered with surgical precision. A year later, the Tuscan sun feels like a distant memory. I sold the villa, that beautiful house of horrors, and I never looked back. I took Leo and Mia, and we moved back to the United States, to a quiet coastal town in California where the air smells of salt and eucalyptus. We live in a modest but bright house a block from the ocean. It's a home filled not with marble and pretense, but with light, laughter, and the happy chaos of two growing children. The kids are thriving. They're in therapy, processing the trauma of losing a father and the confusing truth about the man he was. But children are resilient. They have found joy again in surfing lessons and school plays and building sandcastles on the beach. They are safe and they are loved, and that is all that matters. And me? I found myself again, or rather, I built a new self from the ashes of the old one. I started writing again. I pitched a story to an online investigative journal, my story. They published it, and it went viral. Now, I have a regular column. I write about stories like mine, about exposing the hidden financial and emotional abuse that happens behind the closed doors of picture-perfect homes. I give a voice to the voiceless. My byline is back. My ambition is back. The work gives me purpose. I am financially independent, standing on my own 2 feet for the first time in nearly 2 decades. I am no longer a reflection of anyone. I am simply me, Sarah. Sometimes, in the evening, I walk down to the beach and watch the waves roll in. I watch the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I think about the woman I was, the one who drank the poison tea and believed the loving lies. I don't pity her anymore. I feel a sense of gratitude for her. Her suffering was the crucible that forged the woman I am today. A survivor, a mother, a writer, a woman who is strong, whole, and finally, blessedly, free. So, here is the lesson I want to leave you with, the moral of this insane story. Trust your body. Trust your gut. When you feel like something is wrong, it is. Even if you can't name it, even if the whole world is telling you that you're crazy, listen to that quiet voice inside. It is your truest compass. The people who try to convince you that you are losing your mind are often the ones who are actively trying to steal it from you. Don't let them. And please, hear me on this. The other woman, or in my case, the other accomplice, is not always the primary enemy. They are often just another symptom of the disease, another victim of the main manipulator. My fight wasn't just with Clara. It was with the entire system of lies my husband had built. Children see more than we think. They absorb the tension and the truth in ways we can't imagine. So fight for them. Fight to give them a life based on truth, not on a beautiful, toxic lie. The truth always, always comes out. Sometimes, you just have to be the one brave enough to go looking for it. Your worth is not, and will never be, defined by someone else's betrayal. It is defined by how you rise after the fall. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you in any way, if you've ever felt that flicker of doubt or that fire of injustice, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below and share a piece of your own story if you feel comfortable. You are not alone in this. We are a community of survivors, and we are all in this together. Stay strong, stay blessed, and remember, your story is not over. The best chapters are still waiting to be written. I'll see you in the next video.